out of this room.
Good morning, everyone. We'll start in 2 minutes. People are still trickling in, so we'll let them a couple more minutes to join us. Okay, good morning. Let's start. Welcome to this special EO Talk panel dedicated on classics beyond the Euro-American gaze. I'm Catherine Blouin. I'm one of the founder and editors of Everyday Orientalism, together with my longtime friends and colleagues, Rachel Mayers and Usama Gad, who are both here too. So we're very happy to have you with us today. We really want this event to be a conversation and hopefully the start of a broader and longer conversation beyond this Zoom room. So as you might have seen, the panel is being recorded. So we're planning on uploading it on our YouTube page. The way we're gonna function is I will first give our panelists a chance to share kind of opening thoughts on their own relationship with classics, how it relates to their positioning, and their thought on this broader theme of let's say, the hegemonic force of, Euro-American classics and how for them it impacts their scholarship and how they think also, scholars doing classics outside of this zone. And scholars also working on classics beyond the traditional realm of what classics is thought to be can contribute further to the field at large. So before I introduce our speakers, I just want to acknowledge the land I'm on right now. So I've been living in Toronto for almost 15 years now. The city is also called Toronto. It's been for centuries the traditional land of the Wendat people, the Seneca people, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. The city is still home to many indigenous peoples from all over what some people call Turtle Islands, so North America, and also Métis people and Inuit people. And all these peoples have been taking care of the land of Toronto and of the continent I'm on for over 13,000 years, if not more, and that despite centuries of ongoing European genocide. So I wanted to acknowledge that. So the way we're gonna function is I'm gonna introduce our panelists one by one, so and then they'll talk. So I won't introduce everyone at once. So there'll be a first round, and then we'll have an informal discussion. And for the last 30 to 40 minutes, we'll open up the Zoom room for everyone to either ask questions in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, you have the opportunity as well to talk live with us. So I'm going to start with our first panelist, Amy L. Daniels. Amy is a former German and English teacher who decided to join the ranks of professional classicists in 2014. Though no longer a fledgling academic, Amy feels as though she's constantly running into things she doesn't know or needs to learn about more. And that's what excites her about engaging with Greco-Roman antiquity. In her job as a lecturer at Stellenbosch University in South Africa, she teaches Latin to beginners and intermediate students, and is involved in facilitating modules on ancient Pompeii, mythology, epic, Greek drama, and more. Her PhD project concerns Augustine of Hippo's martyr sermons and anti-Donatist polemic through the lens of trauma studies. Amy, we are really thrilled to have you with us, and well, we're all ears now, so the mic is to you.
Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Catherine. It's a joy and a privilege to be here, even though I feel completely out of my depth. And what I thought I'd do with these opening remarks is I would follow in your footsteps in your recent EO blog post, where you spoke about your own positioning towards classics and in classics. So as you said, I currently work in a department of ancient studies in South Africa. So two things that I've said are important as I seek to explain my positioning within and toward the disciplines collectively known as classics. First, that I am a South African and I work within a South African context. And second, that though I teach Latin and modules on Greco-Roman cultures, my work is just part of a larger whole, focusing on ancient cultural activity around the Mediterranean, North Africa, the Levant, and surrounds. So my work in my department is in no way on any pedestal. So my journey here started with curiosity sparked by an eccentric Latin teacher at my very privileged high school. I took modules in ancient cultures throughout my undergrad, and after my honors in German literature, I pursued a master's in ancient cultures, focusing on Roman Stoicism, Hellenistic Judaism, the Apostle Paul, St. Augustine of Hippo, and I also picked up some Latin during that time. So it is a very middle-class journey I've had in a country where youth unemployment is currently at an all-time high of 64%. Okay, so people between the ages of 18 and 34, 64% are unemployed. Where many of my compatriots live below the breadline. And so I consider my history of engaging with things of beauty and interest, like literature, history, philosophy, and the like, instead of something that could potentially put food on my family's table, I consider that a privilege. And I've grappled with it. I've wondered what value the study of antiquity adds in my unequal society, especially when my own fortunes changed and my family required my financial input. But here's the thing, despite my privileged educational background, and in addition to being a good teacher, I carry diversity in my skin and my ovaries. So classics is still rather dominated by people of Anglo-European heritage in South Africa. And the reasons for this are various and complex. And this is not to say that I am by any means the first or only person of color involved in this discipline. Still, diversity, that ugly little word, has been my constant companion and responsibility, not only during my professional engagement with antiquity, but wherever I've trod within the arts and social sciences. I am diversity, but I'm also meant to attract diversity to my overridingly Anglo-European institution, something which gratefully is actually quite high on the agenda of my ancient studies department. It's all very clumsily handled, but it's too important not to do, just to leave by the wayside. So I bring my embodied diversity and my patchwork training, a little German here, a little English as a foreign language teaching there, a liberal dose of interest in the Greco-Roman antiquity side of things, and I teach undergraduates. And I try to get them to see the Greeks, the Romans, South Africans, with the openness that is required for diversity to succeed, openness that is required. And because my own training largely ignored the classical canon, for which I'm very grateful, I am not bound by any canon. Anyway, I suppose I'm carrying on a bit about a whole lot of things and I'm a bit all over the place. So I'll stop here, but what I'm hoping will emerge during our conversation is an opportunity to talk about such things as the canon, language requirements. I mean, I'm a classicist and I know no Greek, and employability, just during the upcoming discussion. Yeah, that's about all I've got.
Thank you so much, Amy. I'm gonna keep my comments and thoughts for after the discussion, but thank you. That was a very potent start of our conversation. We'll now hear from Juliana Bastos Marques, who's Assistant Professor of Ancient History at Universidade Federal do Estado do Rio de Janeiro. Hopefully I didn't, yes, yay, Brazil. Okay, so she's joining us from Brazil. Juliana published her monograph in Portuguese in 2012, Tradição e renovações da identidade romana em Tito Lívio e Tácito. That might be a mix with a bit of an Italian accent, please forgive me, and has been publishing in the fields of Roman history, theory of history, and digital public history. Her current research topic deals with the reception of the ancient world in Brazilian contemporary politics and society. She was a Fulbright Fellow at Florida State University in 2017 and Newton Fellow at Newcastle University from 2018 to 2020. Her next book, which is co-edited by Federico Santangelo, is entitled Authority in History, Ancient Models, Modern Questions. And it will be published by Bloomsbury Press, inshallah, in early 2022. So Juliana, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Kathleen. I know she asked me to provide her some info on me that this is what she read now. And after I read everybody else's introductions, I thought, oh my God, this was so boring. This is because it is a small part of me. This is the traditional way of introducing people. And it was something that I figured when I went out of Brazil and I went to the US and went to the UK, and I figured that people actually introduce themselves in this sort of, well, do you hear the neighbor? No, they stopped now. That's
hear the neighbor?
Home office.
Oh, we don't.
Yeah, they're I don't know, doing something at their apartment. But this home office, right? Everybody's used to it by now. And so, and when I figured that people introduce themselves in this matter, and I thought, this is so different from Brazil. We don't do that. Why? Because everybody knows each other, because it's such a small group. And I know this because I know many people who are in the chat now. If you don't know some names, if they sound like Brazilian, it's because I asked my friends to join in. I have students here, students of mine joining in, including students from who just arrived at university, the first year students that I thought just now, an hour ago. Thank you, obrigada, gente. And I told them, please go if you can, because we need to occupy these spaces. Otherwise, I'm going to be the only one in this circumstance with these people whom I met by, I don't know, how did you find out about me, Catherine? You know, so it's a rhetorical question for now.
But for Rachel.
Rachel, how did you find out about me? And here he goes. I mean, the small networks that some people are join these networks through circumstantial means. Why me and why not any of my friends who are here in the chat will be equally capable of talking about the same things. It wasn't what I was going to say. I'm sorry. This counts in 5 minutes because Brazilians being informal and 5 minutes, it's something that doesn't come together. I'm sorry about that. I wrote a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. Hopefully we're going to talk about this in the discussion. But there's one thing I wanted to, two things I wanted to introduce that I wanted to talk about. So this idea came, I was talking to Katarina about so many differences that we have between each other, and differences that come from, of course, different backgrounds, geographical situations, differences in academia that we have from different countries that play a huge role. We don't think about it, we don't discuss this, but it does play a huge role on how we think about the discipline. So we outsiders hear about the discourse on the crisis of classics, the current, no, because classics has been in crisis for many long time, but the current crisis of classics in the European and American Twitter and other places too. And we look at that with some sort of strangeness, because we had these discussions, we've already having these discussions in our own setting, with our own situation about what is the field of classics in Brazil, in my case, and in the case of other friends I have here, they know what I'm talking about. And these regional differences show, and I wrote this here while I was sketching all this. Well, that's right. I've been thinking about talking to my students about this whole idea that the Illumination's idea of the universal man, which is what we've been destroying, because the universal man is not universal. It's not planetary because of universal. It's not planetary. The universal man with capital M. If it does exist, it's an idea made from a very specific situation. The universal man is the European white man and American by extension, which is of course not universal. And then if we come to think about the category of the discipline of classical studies, it's also not universal, although it starts from the same set of themes, but it's not universal. This is what everybody's figuring out, and different people are figuring out in different ways, and these different ways come from different circumstances and display a huge part in what we have to come to rethink of what classical studies is. And the second thing I wanted to say is real quickly is, in Brazil, I came to figure out when I went to the US and then the UK, it looks ridiculous to say that. I was talking to Katarina about this the other day. When I figured out I wasn't white, because in Brazil I am white, and I am dealt with as a white person. And then I went to the US, I had to fill in forms, and that I figured, and I wasn't supposed to cross the check, the white option, that I was Latino, Latinx, Latino, whatever, which is ridiculous because you come to Latin America, it's not a category at all. There are white and black and everything else in Latin America in all degrees, especially in Brazil. It's a huge thing. So when I figured I wasn't white, I thought, what am I? And in the UK, I found out I was white until I opened my mouth and people knew where I was from. And then I wasn't white anymore. And I was talking to my friends about it. Everybody was look at each other. Well, yeah, it's random. It's not random, and it is random at the same time. So why in Brazil do we study the ancient world? And this is a question that happens all the time for us to try to explain to our colleagues. Yeah, I'm a historian, and I talk to my historian friends, and they've been doing this all the time. Why do you study ancient history? What does it have to do with us? And then we used to say, well, because law comes from Rome and democracy comes from Greece, all this sort of stuff. But then we figured out classical tradition is the basis of the Western civilization, and Brazil wanted, when it became an independent country, wanted to become part of Western civilization. And to become part of Western civilization, you have to try to throw yourself into the classical tradition no matter what. And what does it mean is Brazil, it was supposed to be, from these intellectuals and the politicians who created Brazil as a country, Brazil was supposed to be a white country. Being a white country, part of the white classical tradition, Greek and Rome, which is absurd. It has always been absurd for so many people here, but it wasn't absurd for academia, for the white academia. And why the whole intellectuals and the rich people, right? Because those things come together. So this attempt to make Brazil become a white country, it started to come to a point where everybody looks at it and say, well, this is completely impossible. This is not supposed to happen. This is absurd, and we have to stop this. So this conflation between the idea of the country which wants to be white, and I think Amy could say something about this in South Africa too, right? A country, a nation that wants to be white, and the fact that this is completely absurd, it's never going to happen. It's good, it's never going to happen. With the idea of the classical as part of this whiteness, so I have to use the classical to try to become as white as we're supposed to become, right? And this is, of course, more than 5 minutes. I'm sorry, let's go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliana. Thank you so much. So many points to mull over and to think about already. Okay, now we're going to hear from Nicola. So Nicola Gonz is a historian of pre-modern South and Southeast Asia with a focus on early India and the Eastern Indian Ocean world. Her current book, entitled Ruled Through Blood, Lineage, Territory, and Power in Early India, traces a critical history of the intersections between kingship, caste, land, and power in India until 1000 CE. Nicola is also working on a project that explores interactions across the pre-modern East Indian Ocean world through language, ritual, and documentary practices. She's interested more broadly in social and economic history, epigraphy, and religion. And I know she has very important things to say about our topic today and also how we define classics. So Nicola, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that really kind introduction. And I must say that I'm really excited to be part of this conversation and to be meeting all of you this morning here in Amherst, Massachusetts, where I'm zooming in from. So I'm currently teaching history, and the two courses that I'm teaching this term, one is on the epic, the Ramayana, and sort of interrogating the epic as a genre to see how we can think about history and its relationship to literature, and particularly how historians may read history through literary genres like the epic. And the other course that I'm teaching is an upper level seminar on the Indian Ocean world. And I think that the reason that I'm teaching these two courses speak very much to my own personal biography and sort of responding to the prompt for the event, which is sort of to think about my relationship to classics in relation to my own scholarly and personal biography and my positionality, I think was a great prompt. So I'm going to take that up to, discuss how, as somebody, as an Indian scholar trained in India, I did my PhD at Jawaharlal Nehru University, and I specialized in ancient history. So the history department at Jawaharlal Nehru University and in other universities in India are traditionally have been organized after the historical process of decolonization into ancient, medieval, and modern history. And particularly the field of ancient history has a very long tradition of grappling with both sort of colonialism and its aftermath, especially post the 1950s, when scholars like B.R. Ambedkar, D.D. Kosambi, Shukumari Bhattacharjee, and then of course, in the 70s and 80s, Romila Thapar, and feminist scholars like Uma Chakravarti, Kumkum Roy, sort of grappled concretely with the ways in which sort of the experience of colonialism, has determined the way in which we write history and think about the past, and particularly the ancient past. So in a sense, I'm drawing upon that, standing on the shoulders of giants, so to speak. But having said that, my own doctoral work was very much sort of bounded within the analytical frame of the nation state, which is perhaps not surprising, given that I am a product of a post-colonial educational system, and the frame of the nation state was very important for reasons that we are now well aware of. But now, as I kind of progressed further in my doctoral research, I sort of began to feel the urge and the impetus and the desire to kind of see how we can both acknowledge the reality and the power of the nation state frame, and also to see how those of us invested in sort of critical pre-modern history also need to sort of push beyond the frame of the nation state. So my own work that that now is sort of looking at connections across ocean space, right? But not reproducing the older ideas of a greater India, which sort of, actually sort of used colonial categories to speak of, colonization across ocean space. So actually to look at the ways in which we must think about these interactions in a complex and complicated way. So that's sort of what my research is moving towards. And I just wanted to sort of also say something then, drawing upon my own positionality as somebody trained in India and now teaching in North America, is that, perhaps what I just said makes clear that classics as a field, unlike, what Juliana was just saying, doesn't exist in India. We study ancient history. So those of us who would like to, understand the pre-modern past, approach it either through the discipline of archaeology or the discipline of history, where we are taught how to analyze material and textual sources. And I am particularly favorable to inscriptional sources for a variety of reasons. But that is not to say that classics as a discipline, as it exists in other parts of the world, do not have a relationship to India, right? So, and when I say this, I talk, I'm referring specifically to the sort of 18th and 19th century history of sort of Orientalist reading of texts, Orientalist study of ancient South Asia and ancient India. And of course, we now know the sort of deep implications of the development of the discipline of classics in the 18th and 19th centuries and its connections to imperialism and colonialism. So of course, the history of India, colonial India, is deeply tied up to this history. So to give a concrete example, many of the translations that I might, and therefore this is now changing, but many of the translations I might be using with in the classroom are in fact these older 18th and 19th century Orientalist translations. So this is something that I have to constantly kind of grapple with as I'm, reading these texts contrapuntally with students, often sort of alerting them to why people chose to translate something particular way and not in any other way. So my own relationship then to classics as someone now teaching in North America is one of an interested and I would say an invested observer, because I would not describe myself as a classicist. I would say that I'm a historian of critical pre-modern history. And the reason for my interest and investment, and which is why I'm so happy to be part of this conversation, is, mainly due to the struggles recently to remake classics, right? To make it speak to a changed and changing world, and that there is a real desire, and an energy, as evidenced by this event and endeavors such as Everyday Orientalism, to transform classics, to make it into something that is, sincerely anti-racist and anti-white supremacist, which is why I believe this is such an interesting and important conversation to be having, all of us together. And the reason I say this, again, to sort of build upon what I'm saying, is that, we are now keenly aware of how ideas about the ancient Mediterranean past, and to some extent scholarship about the same, have been and continue to be instrumentalized and weaponized to justify exclusionary ethno-nationalist claims in the present. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the same can be said about the ancient and pre-modern Indian past, where the ideas of a pristine golden age more often than not glossed as Hindu, and of course this is totally fictional, unbeknownst to say, and ahistorical, is deployed to justify and push forward ethno-nationalist exclusionary politics in present-day South Asia. And in this vision of India's, golden age, its, golden past, there are always outsiders, right? And who this outsider is a constantly moving target in terms of who can and cannot belong to the present-day nation state of India. But religious minorities, Christians and Muslims are always included in this category of outsider, right? So whether entering, as traders or as invaders, violently as invaders, I mean, it sort of depends on who is, writing these fictional narratives about India's golden age. So of course, these narratives not only are ahistorical and completely fictional, but have no understanding of historical complexity. But that doesn't mean that they're not persuasive or powerful in providing justification for exclusionary politics. So, to wrap up, what I'm really looking forward to in this conversation for all of us is to see how those of us committed to critical pre-modern history, how we can learn from each other, how we can work together, right? So to make sure that it's not so much about incorporating different parts of the world and making classics more diverse without questioning the foundations of that discipline, right? But to see how our scholarship, a critical study of the pre-modern world, can actually contribute towards building a world that is more just, equitable, humane, and sustainable than the one we currently inhabit. And I sincerely believe that a critical study of the pre-modern world, of the past, that didn't necessarily teleologically lead to the present, right? That had these other opportunities for us to go in different directions, is and one that sincerely engages with diverse perspectives and experiences. A conversation precisely like this is capable of contributing towards such transformations.
Nicola, thank you. Wow, you guys are all kicking asses, if I may say so myself. And I guess our last panelist will also do the same. Let me now introduce Usama Ali Gad. Usama is a tenured lecturer of papyrology and Greco-Roman studies at Ain Shams University in Cairo, in Egypt. And he's also, as I've said at the start of the event, the co-founder of Everyday Orientalism with Rachel, Mares, and myself. In addition to this, he's also the founder of another wonderful blog, which I encourage you to check out, called Classics in Arabic. So due to his non-traditional academic background, Usama does have a broad range of interests, including translation studies, second language acquisition, heritage and foreign language teaching, historical languages learning and teaching, more specifically Greek and Latin, ancient history, papyrology, Greco-Roman heritage in Egypt, and classical Arabic translation of Greek into Latin, as well as the history of classical studies in Egypt and digital classics. He has many more interests, but I shall stop here. And I am looking forward, Usama, to hear your thoughts on our theme today.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you very much for this introduction. Thank you everyone for joining this talk. I hope I will be able to say something to this and contribute something, from my epistemic position. I think my epistemic position from my name is clear, but I will just clarify this. I grew up in Egypt, so it's an Arabic country, an Arabic, mostly Islamic country. Of course, it has a history of Christianity, where Coptic community are there for centuries. And this is my epistemic position, and this is where I look at classics, or more broadly to antiquity. And this is important, I think, in this conversation, because we have listened to colleagues and friends from South America, from India, South Africa. I hope also we could include everyone who is excluded, from the grand European narrative of antiquity. That's even healthy. And in this time, I think, in this time in history, in this time of globalization, of immigration, I think this is important, to go beyond this grand European narrative. I think everyone here may be familiar with the fact that many immigrants' families are now in Europe and the States and everywhere in the Western, what is called Western countries. But again, they are taught in schools history, which is dominantly Eurocentric, which start with, of course, Egypt is, the traditional start from, the Stone Ages and other things, and you will go to Egypt and the Roman world and Middle Ages in Europe. So it's like that, And even though many of these immigrants coming from the global South, mostly from Arabic and Islamic countries, they are taught the history, or the chapter about them, about the ancestors of these immigrants, does not fit in this grand European narrative. Just 2 pages on 1 page, between late antiquity and early Middle Ages, So there came the Muslims, they occupied this area, and that's it. Okay, so and I see that this is a problem, actually, because antiquity studies is something that has to tell us more about our own modernity, about capitalism, about economy, about society in the modern world, more than what we know about antiquity itself, because it's mostly dominated, by Western writings and Western perspectives. I'm not saying that it's not true. It's not a matter of true or false or subjective or objective. It's a matter of answering the questions, Now, the questions are about the past, about antiquity is now different. So because the societies are now different. We are not living anymore in colonialism. We are not trying to justify why the white people from the north are occupying us. So the question now, why we are in this moment in history. So and again, the digital age, so global age. So why there are most of the information available about antiquity are in languages, which is English, French, Italian, or German. So these are questions, are left over by the classic tradition. If we agree that classic has this, prestigious position within antiquity itself, whatever the antiquity is, Egyptian or Assyriology or whatever the civilization that we are studying. So classic or classical antiquity, classical age is something that is prestigious. And as my colleague said, this is the foundation of Europe. This is the foundation of Western civilization, modern Western civilization. So it is somehow historicizing for the modernity, for the progress of the West, more than telling us about antiquity. At least this is what I believe in. To speak, I have just talked about my epistemic position, and to turn into another important point, which is the invisibility, the invisibility of scholars who don't fit, who are said to be outsiders to the field. I can say that I feel an outsider in this field, antiquity studies, and that my work now concentrate on giving more information about the connection between Arabic and Islamic history and classics. Because if you say classics, Greek and Latin, Greek has been translated in the Abbasid period, and Baghdad, and that fits again in this antiquity and late antiquity and the foundations of modern communities. If you can say the modern communities in the Middle East, the foundation are in the 7th century, and I think the European and Western civilization are Karl the Great, and 8th century, again with an influence from the Muslims, So to make this story short, I may recommend this new publication, which is called, it's published by Burrell, it's a handbook of modern Arabic historical scholarship on the ancient and medieval worlds, where you can read a chapter, about classics in Egypt and the Arabic world, which I have written when I was a British Academy Fellow and Institute of Classical Studies in London. I'm happy to see Greg here in the audience, under his leadership, of course. I would just like to read just a paragraph from the editor, here. It's a wonderful book, actually, and Brill has done wonderful work on it. And I will conclude with reading this paragraph from the editor, because you have 16 chapters about everything, about classics in Syria, classic in Iraq, Assyriology in Iraq, classics in Egypt, Byzantine studies in Egypt, Byzantine studies and classical studies in North Africa and everything. So it's a wonderful book. So the author, Marbaji, whom I thank greatly, for this opportunity, said that it would be very unfortunate if, rather than existing in one large global community, each of the various disciplines discussed in this book is allowed to bifurcate into largely separate communities of Western and non-Western scholars with limited contact between the two. Such a situation leads to inefficiency. For example, there is a problem on both sides of scholars reinventing the wheel due to being unaware of research published in another language. And hampers dialogue and exchange of ideas, essential conditions for the growth and development of any field of scholarship. The present volume is a modest attempt to create a bridge between the Arab and Western communities of pre-modern historians, and it is the sincere hope of the editor and all the contributors to this volume that their work will encourage others on both sides to take the initiative in opening new avenues for collaborations, dialogue, and exchange of ideas and research. Thank you.
Shukran, ya Osama. Thank you, all four of you, for these incredible, honest and deep reflections. We're really, really happy to have you here today. And I'm also happy that all of you in the audience are here today as well to share that moment with us. So I'm gonna try to pull together all the threads that you wove in your remarks. To me, all that you shared together poses one of the questions that was really at the root of why we decided to put together this event. And the root is the observation and our, I guess, shared experience of sometimes finding ourselves in spaces that are tagged as classic spaces. And more specifically in classic spaces that also are tagged as being quote unquote decolonizing or about questions of diversity, which is a very problematic word. I agree with what Amy was saying. And so we find ourselves in these spaces and then we realize that we don't fit in. We realize that these spaces where important conversations are happening are in the process of making these important conversations happening, replicating some kind of a hegemonic bubble that is very exclusionary, despite the actual great work that is done within the bubble, right? And so we find ourselves kind of engaging with a world that we don't feel like we belong to. And the exclusion can take many forms. And I think all four of you have expressed some of these types of exclusion, right? So it's this idea of classics being performed and acquired and taught within a essentially North American, especially American from the USA, and European habitus. It is classics being represented also as a discipline that looks at the past, but a past that is bound by very particular chronologies, spaces, and languages. And it is a classics that is being produced through scholarship in an array of languages that remain fundamentally Eurocentric. And lastly, it is a classics that doesn't, still today, does not really, I think, care that much about truly engaging beyond academia, right? So there are some conversations about outreach, but outreach means we reach out, so we bring our knowledge. But what about, what can communities in the countries and the societies where our data come from, how can they contribute to the conversation? How can all of our communities outside of the US, of the UK, and of continental Europe, how can the way the ancient Mediterranean, West Asian, or even going all the way to the Indian Ocean, how do their reception and their understanding can actually contribute to us doing more justice to what these worlds we study were actually like and were actually about. So thank you so much. I think this is a really very fertile discussion. And I'm mindful of time, and we have about 30 people in the audience with us, and I'm sure many people have thoughts they want to share. So I think we might just go ahead and open up the floor for discussion. I'm gonna let people, the time, if you want to post questions in the chat or raise your hand, please do so. And in the meantime, we can count on Juliana to get the conversation going. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I get really excited.
Don't apologize. Don't apologize.
No, I don't know how much time we have, but like I said, with some friends here in Brazil, the fact that, let's say it takes I don't know if it's going to happen, but let's say it takes like 3 hours or so. This is a measure of success. the more time we have, the more the measure of success.
Well, we have a 50% Brazilian success. So we've timed it for an hour and a half. We have 40 minutes left. So yeah, go ahead.
Oh God. so let me focus on a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. And coming from what everybody else said and what you said now, you mentioned one word, which I think it's symbolic in all this. From my point of view, I think other people's point of view too. You mentioned the word diversity. And when I hear the word diversity, the English word diversity, in the context that has been used, the context I've been reading about, it feels to me as a marketing strategy for universities which are competing amongst themselves for students, classic students, which is actually not that many people as they needed and wanted to. So this is empty in that sense, because you get the brochure from the universities, glossy and shiny, and you have that many pictures of non-white people in the brochure, and you step into the classroom and it's not like that at all. So it's kind of an empty marketing strategy, marketing words. And outreach becomes like that too, like you said. I mean, outreach has come from us too. It's kind of the white savior thing, but 21st century version. Or inside, even I was thinking, I read the word outreach in the UK quite a lot, and it was the elite coming to the rest of the people. So there's the economic side of all this, which is also racial, as in everywhere in the world, not only, but also. So the words have completely different meanings than they intend to, which is obvious, which is something we know, right? So they do have these meanings that they've been used for, but they also have other meanings that haven't been talked about. And so I'm sorry, I'm gonna say this. I know this is being recorded, but I need to give you everybody else one other example of a word which kind of hijacks the different discourses. And you are in Canada, you know what I'm talking about. The word America, as in the US. Because if we don't say that, so many people don't know. And I was talking to very good friends. I thought they were supposed to know that. And America is a continent. So the word America being hijacked for one country, it erases everybody else, right? This is just one example. This is not about the classics, but in the sense of the way that we use words, the way that we use classics. In Brazil, we also have the difference between history and languages departments and the archaeologists. We talk to each other, but we all go into our different methodologies, that sort of thing. So classics means what we're saying is kind of obvious, but it has so many things that we can come up to when thinking about it. Classics means it doesn't just mean one thing. The Greek and Roman world means so many levels of things to so many different people in spatial and in terms of space and time. So it's a multiple way of looking at something that kind of wants to be just one thing. It's kind of confusing, but
I guess so
classics is a construction, yes, but it's not just one construction. It's many different constructions in many different frameworks of time and space. That's better.
Lucien Nixon agrees with you. And I just, fun fact, in Quebec, I'm from Quebec, so the main language is French, the official language is French. And so we have this word États-Unis, because United States is États-Unis in French.
Estados Unidos, yeah.
So yeah, we use États-Unis sometimes just to make a point, but I don't think there's an equivalent in English yet. So this in itself is meaningful.
And the people who are from the US, not as in Americans, we have another word in Portuguese, which estadunidense. Estados Unidos, estadunidense.
Yeah,
so the way we deal with this, I mean, and not that many other people know about this word, because this the word doesn't exist in English, right? And the other thing I want to talk is the languages, but I know you have other things to talk about too, so I'll keep it to myself for now if you want to.
Thank you, Juliana. I'm looking at our 3 other panelists. Do you want to add something at this point?
I was just thinking of the importance of what Juliana was saying about language as perpetuating this sort of exclusionary politics that Nicola highlighted for us in her introductory remarks. And I wonder if there is a way around, a way through, a way beyond such words as diversity and America. And what our work as classicists is in contributing to making sure that language evolves in a way that is no longer so exclusionary. You know, I mean, I think it was Juliana who spoke about classics itself as contributing to aspirational whiteness in certain countries and certain contexts. So how do we shirk off those chains? How do we start to contribute to a conversation that no longer privileges such things? I know I'm all over the place, that's just how I talk. But I just had those 2 thoughts while Juliana was contributing.
You are not all over the place. And what you just said, and what also you shared, I mean, in your comments, in the opening comment, made me think of the word of Sarah Ahmed. I'm sure many of you in the audience know Sarah Ahmed. She has this book now that just came out called Complaint. And it really is centered around this whole question of, you know, institutional violence that is produced in academia. And she focuses on university institutions and how often this is done through a performance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think these are conversations really worth having as well within antiquity fields, right? Classics being one of them that we all identify to in and out in different degrees. I'm aware that we have Heba Abdelgawad in the audience. I don't know if Heba is, yes, Heba is here. Heba, do you want to say
yes,
something? I know Heba will have something to say. Do you mind me putting the spotlight on you?
No, not at all, not at all. And I'm enjoying this so much, and I do feel like me being I also have an identity crisis when I come to how I define myself in the field, because I'm trained as an Egyptologist, but my PhD, for example, was in the later periods of Egypt. So for Egyptologists, I am a classicist, but for classicists, I am an Egyptologist. And for myself, I don't know who I am, but I'm not really sure where I'm also a person who I do hate labels and being boxed in a specific thing, but I can relate to 2 main things that were just brought up in the discussion earlier. In the very early discussions, me being Egyptian, just like Osama, and the bomb that I had to throw at my friends to let them know that they are not actually white. They were surprised to realize that we in Egypt, we are not perceived as white, or we are not white in the technical definition of the meaning. Like, we might have a bit of the color, but not the privilege. And that was quite surprising to them. On the other hand, in the years that I've spent in the UK, I was always the diversity check, because I'm Egyptian, I'm female, I'm visibly Muslim, I wear the headscarf. So I usually, I was in all the advertisements in my university, in anything that the department does. I'm the first one to get all the emails. Aheba, we have to make sure you're there. We have a photo shoot. I have to admit, initially it was disturbing, but then I realized I might as well use it in my benefit, in the sense that if this is how if this is how the system is, and if this is how the institution operates, which is obviously racist and problematic, but I'm incapable of doing something to change the structure because maybe I'm the weakest link or because that needs years and years of activism. But I learned that I can always use the platform offered to me as a diversity check in the sense of bringing other voices in or being difficult in, like, I know I'm there as as a diversity check, but I'm also blunt and direct, and I'm just not there to have a smile and pretend I'm happy with everything that is going on. But I can use the little bit of this tick box as a way of being difficult. I don't know if the others have any experience of how this is the system, this is how it exists, and I don't know if hopefully it will change, but I'm not sure if that would happen soon or when. But how can we make use of the current injustice in our favor? Not to say that we play along, but try to find for ourselves a way of moving forward, perhaps manipulating the existing injustice, but in our favor rather than being another oppressive circle. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense, but I just want to have, because I'm very happy to be among all of you and I'm really excited. And I thought I can pick your thoughts for all of us to think aloud of what can we do, in how can we operate.
Heba, thank you so much. Anyone wants to respond to that? And this is an open question. So Nicola, and then we have Amy as well. So Nicola, go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks, Heba, and Amy and Juliana and Osama and everybody. I'm just really, learning a lot, but also a lot of things sort of are resonating with me in terms of thoughts that I've had and often don't have an opportunity to articulate because such spaces are really rare. But just the sort of what Heba was just saying, this kind of, the sort of sometimes, excruciating tension between predatory inclusion and exclusions. And that how, we constantly have to think about how we might sort of, in a sense, sort of, address this and sort of move towards kind of resolution of this tension. And some of the ways in which, what Osama was talking about, sort of the idea of sort of diversity now in the classrooms that we are all in and how that diversity, of course, manifests itself is sort of context specific. But there is that diversity, both when I was teaching in India in terms of diversity of caste and language and gender, and now, of course, in when I was teaching in Canada and now teaching in the US. And how that actually impacts the study of the ancient world, because students are coming to the classroom with certain expectations. And then often when we kind of talk about the ancient world, it really militates against what they have come into the classroom with. So I feel like those moments in the classroom are sort of important cracks that we may then kind of, build upon. And one of the ways in which I kind of do that in the space of the classroom is actually sort of alert students to sort of exclusions through citational politics. So while we as sort of, scholars of the critical pre-modern world both have to contend with the ways in which the past is implicated in the present, so what Osama was talking about, but also how, while traditional scholars of the classics, we need to perhaps cite them. And when I say we, I mean those of us who are studying the history of sort of worlds outside of the, ancient Mediterranean. We kind of feel that we must cite that scholarship, but those scholars more often than not don't feel the need to cite my scholarship. So I think the sort of just alerting students to these kinds of citational politics and how that also is a sort of way in which we must sort of break that silence in a certain sense is an important way in which I feel that we can use precisely what Heba was saying, that once, how can we sort of break this tension, and then of course alert students to the fact that, how can we then think of words, right? So what does the classical mean in the context? It means something in the context of the ancient Mediterranean, but what does it mean when you're talking about Southeast Asia or South Asia? Why is Sanskrit a classical language and not any other? So just some thoughts.
Thank you, Nicola. Amy?
I think actually Nicola has expressed a lot of what I wanted to say so beautifully. So thank you for that, Nicola. I was just wondering from Heba, as someone who's more reserved, less confrontational and blunt, I'm interested in your approach to predatory diversification in, I'll call it propaganda for institutions. Or marketing, whatever the PC word is. I just wondered about the responses and the conversations that open up around kicking back and digging your heels in and calling people on the problematic nature of diversity checkboxes. Using the system, but also, I don't know. I think you get the gist of what I'm trying to say.
Heba, do you wanna answer? You're around? Yes.
Yes. I've missed a bit of it because the internet was a bit unstable. But from what I've also wanted to add something that yes, when it comes that the university does use me as the diversity check, but I noticed that others who are a minority like myself, when they see me on some of those department advertisements, or when they see me invited for something to give a talk again as a diversity check, etc., they also feel included. It's good in a way that it does encourage the others, like us being the others and the others among us, like all of us others, in the sense that it does give them a bit of motivation that they, or a bit of a different or a similar role model. Not to say that I'm a role model, but for example, when I was doing my PhD, there were other undergrads, and I was at a very, I don't know if Rachel is still here, but if someone is in the UK, I was at Durham University, and Durham is a very white, small. They call it a city just because it has a cathedral, but I bet it's a town. In other parts of the world, it will just be a small town. I come from Cairo, so it happens to have a cathedral, so that's the only reason they call it a city. Well, it's a very white city, and it's a very white university. And when other foreign students used to see me as someone doing the PhD, particularly students from the Middle East, or even British students who were Muslims or hijabi, they used to approach me in how that I made them feel included, or I made them feel also feel supported in a way. Even we all know that we are just a diversity check, but I felt that this is how I can play with the system, like I can play around it, that it does use me, fair enough, but I also understand that the others who feel excluded like myself, who happen to see those advertisements, would see the diversity check that this is a propaganda, but would equally see themselves would equally feel included, even if it's an empty inclusion. But for the younger generation, or those who haven't been yet included in such difficult, and bearing in mind that most university undergraduates in the UK wouldn't know much about the history of British colonialism at all. This is not something that they get taught in university, and they wouldn't really understand why they are always other than the deep roots of colonialism that led to them, even if they are third immigrant generation, etc. So perhaps for them it's positive. I feel like I can help them in a way, and then they feel more that it's easy for them to approach me and discuss, and then I can make it a bit clearer for them. I have to say, taking from Nicola's talk about the classroom, because I was offered, like I had to teach in the university. I've taught in various occasions at the UK. And what was interesting, that people would enroll in my tutorials because for them it was strange. Someone from Egypt who's who's hijabi as well, and she can teach. So I bet they were only enrolling because I was like a museum display in a way, or something that they are not used to. I understand, I'm saying it, I'm taking it lightly, but I also understand that it's not their fault as the younger generation. I do sympathize with the loads of misunderstandings that come with the younger generation who didn't have yet the opportunity to be educated about these issues. And then as Nicola used this for me, even just at the moment I utter a single word just to prove to them that someone from Egypt, and I'm sure Osama can relate, can speak, and I'm Muslim and I can travel abroad on my own, that was like a miracle for them to see, even if I made no sense at all in whatever teaching I was doing, but just to see an example that breaks the stereotype that they see in the media, or because there are other problems that come with the othering that happens to us in academia that does have an impact on how we are othered in the socio-political world in general, and the role that the academic narrative or the museum display have played in how we remain invisible totally, or we remain stereotyped, particularly when it comes to Islamophobia, etc. So yeah, so this is, I'm sorry if I kept on going on and on without making sense, but hopefully I did answer your question, Amy.
You answered it wonderfully, and I just want to dovetail with Osama actually. I know I'm jumping in here, but he spoke a lot about feeling an invisible scholar. And I wonder, with this younger generation being exposed to people of color, people that don't fit the mold for teaching classics or whatever the case may be, whether there is hope, for change in this citational exclusion and scholarly exclusion as well. Sorry, Osama.
No, Amy, thank you very much for all this, wonderful ideas of all. I was listening and was saying that's exactly what I am talking about, what I'm writing about, and citational politics, yes, of course. We are somehow excluded. By we, I mean everyone who is not writing in English or German, French, Italian, maybe Spanish also. And that's how this past century, I mean the 20th century, was how the national, Nicola was talking about that, how the national states reinvented the history in order to cut off any diversity, because diversity was a problem of the imperialism. Okay, there was many nations, many communities, many languages, and now the solution came the national state, and we have national curriculum, and now we have a classroom, and now we have to have a narrative, a solid narrative for everyone. So, and citational politics and solid narrative has foundation, and foundation is civilization, and civilization is wisdom, and this is a logic, okay? And that's how invisibility came to be. That's what Hiba was talking about, to be, everyone knows Egyptian only as they are living in, tombs, or robbing tombs, or, trafficking antiquities, or, building pyramids, or, whatever you have been fed in the classroom. And that's it, these are the Egyptians. And not only Hiba, but my wife too, and many others here in Europe, I have to say, is struggling with this idea. You are not a university professor, you are not a physician, you are not an engineer, you are not even a classicist, because you don't fit, you don't simply fit, because you are an outsider, okay, outsider to the Western civilization. Western civilization inherited the Greek-Roman civilization. How could you be a classicist, because no one has a privilege to be a classicist, unless you are a Western, and how to define Western. We know how the national states have defined this Western civilization. And I think this is important to understand the moment that we are in. Diversity now is a fact. Yes, the national state national systems are struggling everywhere. In Egypt, it's struggling in the Arab countries, in Europe, in the States, in America, in South America. The national states are struggling, to do education and health, and that's the structure. Economic is a structure, but we, the classicists, the historians, everyone is the infrastructure. I mean, the cultural infrastructure, which has this economic, to fit in certain position, So that's exactly what we are in now. And it's too early to say that nationalism is over, but you can see it. You can see how how nationalism is struggling not only in national but international levels, how they are struggling to hold on, and the Western, of course, the Western world are trying to put hold of everything in order to get over the crisis of capitalism, a crisis of immigration, and why the people are now getting from the south and into the north in order to be able to live, not just, before that they lived in the south and worked for the north, okay, whatever that is. If you are buying from a certain brand of clothes in a factory in the West that is manufactured in a certain place, and and it's cheap because there are cheap labor there, okay? So they are trying to export the problems and the crisis and to prolong this. And that's exactly the idea of, to me at least, the idea of antiquity, the idea of history, this grand European narrative, They are not trying to say that Western civilization are struggling and Western civilization are going to decline, disintegrate. I don't know, but actually there is a problem now, and everyone in every country knows that, struggling with educational and health system, even now in the corona, and education and school, clothing and everything, you have to see that the national state are struggling, and as a result, departments like classics and history are struggling because it does not anymore fit in, because they were just this narrative, you have to keep the narrative. The narrative is now disintegrating because the people have moved, the people are moving and will keep moving. And that's the future. One last remark, mostly the conversation are in English or other languages, which is in the Western academia. In Egypt, when I speak in Arabic to my colleagues, they, what we're talking about? What? Western civilization, classics, antiquity, exclusion, diversity? No, we don't know that. We have to do the edition, we have to do the archaeological things, we have to do the things which is now, they are trying to cope with the advances of antiquities studies in the West, which is, again, they are not engaging in this conversation, because the conversation are here in the West, mostly, okay? And in Arabic, it is mostly absent, unless someone like me has an access to the Western scholarship, so he can, bring some ideas again, which is, again, it's outreach, Sorry for taking so much time.
Thank you, Usama. Do we have anyone in the audience who wants to share something that struck you so far in the discussion, or if you have a question? Oh, Fabio Frizzo has a question in the chat. I'm going to read it. I would like to propose two questions. India and Egypt are recognized in general imagery as having great ancient civilizations and civilizations that were connected to classical Mediterranean society. So as a Brazilian, I am really curious to know better how ancient history is treated in South Africa. I would also like to hear more about the employability of scholars specialized in ancient societies that Amy referred to in different contexts, like South Africa, India, Egypt, etc. So Amy, do you want to start answering that question?
I'll try my best. I feel like I'm a representative for the entire South African context.
No, you're not. You're representing your own experience, obviously.
I think ancient civilizations and classical Mediterranean societies are often seen in the South African context as the domain of the privileged. It still has this link with aspirational whiteness. Because of our history of colonialism and apartheid, we do have a lot of neoclassical architecture, for example. All our statues of great figures from Queen Victoria to Cecil John Rhodes, who are all contentious and all part of the evils of coloniality, are all done in classical style. So there is this link between the classics and white supremacy. in South Africa, I believe. And it is the job of universities specifically, because we no longer have things like Latin and Greek in schools, except for a very few semi-private and private schools. It is the job of the university to start to, I suppose, explode that myth, especially the myth that, and I do think it's a myth, that there is a direct link between ancient Greece, Rome, and European history and greatness, if you want to call it that. So I think, as far as my context is concerned, we try to treat the classical Mediterranean as just another society in world history. I'm really grateful to Nicola for introducing me to critical pre-modern history as a concept, because that's kind of what we're trying to do, I think. At least at my university. I know at others, they're still clinging to the canon. They're still trying to do things as one does in Britain, where they're all trained. But yeah, that's kind of where my thinking is and where our department is on dealing with classical civilizations in South Africa. And then in terms of employability for people specializing in classics, this is a problem to me. I feel really burdened for our graduates, because as I usually sell our discipline, I tell people that we train you how to write and to think critically so that you can go do other things, so that you can go and be copywriters and magazine editors and whatever. Because there just isn't any work for anyone specializing in ancient studies. And if you want to specialize, well, then you have to conform to the European standard of knowing at least 2 European languages and Greek and Latin. So get started on those now. That's sort of the advice I give students. And I know it's problematic, but that's exactly what I'm grappling with.
This is a really important point, and I see that Juliana says something. Oh, Sama too.
So I was just saying about the employability of scholars. I mean, you know, in Egypt, for example, you know, from my own experience, they are mostly teachers, you know, or university professors, you know. So that's within the academia, you know, and that's mostly the case also in the West. You know, the classics does not give you any chance of a solid career, you know, unless you are doing research. Otherwise, you are just, you know, a person who has studied great civilizations, and at the end of the month, you cannot pay your rent. You know, so, sorry for saying that.
Juliana?
Amy, you were talking about students and the orthodox way of path for the students. I have some of my students are here in the session. You know, I've been telling them, well, unfortunately, if you want to study the ancient world, you have to at least be fluent in one or the languages. I don't recommend Spanish, which is really important, but I would recommend English or French or German, depends on what you want to study, that sort of thing. But mostly English, you have to survive. I'm sorry, but that's how it goes. And this is related to what I want to say about diversity and inclusion. Just to add a different take on the situation, then I'll go back to, I think, something that will resonate with everyone. In Brazil, specific case of Brazil, public universities are the research universities and are constitutionally free. So there's no way to have this sort of competition between students. The budget, what budget anyway? But the budget comes from the federal government. It used to come from the federal government, and it's kind of equally divided between universities. There's no such thing as a competition between students and why I study here because it's shinier than the other university, that sort of thing. But we've had in the last, anybody in the chat can help me with the dates. Before 2016, we had this government policy for affirmative action. So in this affirmative action, I got my job out of this. And many of my students, some of them who are here too, entered university because of this affirmative action, which is obviously related to race and to economic situation. So the public free universities are free, it's nice, okay, but they are supposed to be just for the small elite. So you have to study in a very expensive private school to be able to enter the free university. That's how it goes here. So it was supposed to be closed. So the start of the affirmative action started to open the universities for people who weren't from this elite background. So then we got as much diversity as we could in the university, which is, and now right now this is having a backlash. And this current government, which is Trump-like style and other stuff, we can talk about it later if you want to, but please don't, because it makes me depressed. So, and the idea is there is an idea to make the universities closed again. But if we come to this diversity, and here I think it's not just a problem of Brazil, we talked about languages. Portuguese is not a language where you can find every sort of source available at all. Not even Portuguese for Brazil, Portuguese for Portugal. It has a lot to do with the state of the publishing market here in Brazil, which is of course what in the US and Europe would be considered vanity publishing, like you paying yourself to publish your book. I have friends here, they know what I'm talking about. We have to do this in order to publish anything, because no editor is going to publish our study as great as it is. And because the market is small and they want to sell, whatever sells, but not academic publishing, it's really restricted. So it's kind of it's what we do. We put money from our own pockets and we distribute the free ebooks. We don't get about it. Look at it, and he's the one I'm talking about. So coffee table books is not an option here at all, you see. And distributing the book for free most of the time, because our students, I can tell you about my own students here at it's Rio de Janeiro is the second biggest city in the country. It's really huge, kind of, I don't know what in terms of size, it's kind of like Cairo, but it's really huge, and the other cities around it. I have some students who are having problems coming back to the physical classroom because they don't have money to pay the ticket for the bus, because they lost their jobs, that sort of thing. So it's not like we're going to have them buy books, expensive books in English, hardcover books in English. The library doesn't have that money as well. So we have to find alternative ways to get all that if we want to. I'm sorry to say this, but that's true. That's the absolute truth. So someone showed a very interesting book. I have no idea how I'm going to get it outside of alternative ways, because the book may be not expensive, but the shipping cost is like twice the price of the book, let's say, for a start. And in terms of diversity, no, just finishing. In terms of diversity, one thing is to open the university to people, the more people, and the other thing is to keep them there and to keep them able to do research by, in these cases of maybe Nicola could say something about other languages other than English in India, right? And publishing marketing for these languages. So you have to be able to be fluent enough in English in order to follow everything. My own fluency in English comes from circumstances that mostly have nothing to do with academia, because I wanted to when I was a teenager, because I was a Beatles fan and I wanted to read the biographies. Yeah, that's true. It wasn't cool. It wasn't cool to be a Beatles fan in the 90s, but that's mainly the reason why I wanted to learn English so much. It's completely circumstantial, right? So, of course, at the same time, I was privileged enough in Brazil to be able to study in a private school, to be able to go to university and to have access to the English I could. But this is an exception. This is not what I want us to do. And as a teacher, this is not what I want to do, because knowledge is there and people are interested, and I'm going to close doors in front of them. And in terms of languages, the idea that you have to be fluent enough in one language to read and to write, because it's not just being fluent, you have to be part of the network somehow. And we know, we as non-native speakers of English know that it's not enough to know English. You have to sound fluent enough, because if you don't sound fluent enough, people will look at you as if you had some sort of mental problem. Like, well, I'm not interested in what this person has to say because the English is not good enough. This happens. Everybody knows that this happens. So languages as some, this discussion was thriving in the Classicists Liverpool,
the mail list?
Server, the mail list, yes. It entered a completely strange path after the beginning, but it was really important.
Yeah, I'm not on that list, sir. Listen, I'm mindful of time because we've run. Well, we've been chatting for an hour and a half. No, but Juliana,
what I wanted to say. Sorry. Yeah.
No, this is fine. I think, you know, I'm almost saying a sequel to this, because I think a lot of the discussion has brought up points about ways forward potentially, but also about questions that pertain to accessibility and to mechanisms of streamlining and gatekeeping, not only in terms of where the knowledge is produced, but how can one access this knowledge, right? In terms of the classroom, many of us have had to study abroad, otherwise we would never have even been considered, in terms of accessing books, of accessing resources. So this is just a start, but I think it was a fabulous and very powerful conversation. So everyone, please join me in thanking our fabulous panelists, Amy Daniels, Nicola Gonz, Juliana Bastos Marques, and Usama Gad. I will circulate a link to the panel. It's been recorded. We were very happy to have you all here with us today. Bye, everyone.